morning, everyone. My name is Stacey. I'm an engineer, a project manager, and I'm your tour guide today for our tour of Pawsey. We love welcoming visitors like you to Pawsey. We've got so many stories to share and incredible technology to show you. I'd like to start our tour today with an acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the lands we're meeting on, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I acknowledge and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I also pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging from the lands that you're watching our presentation from. Today, I'm standing in our beautiful new visualisation lab. The Visualisation Lab is a collaborative space for researchers to analyse and investigate their data, as well as exploring new ways to visualise their research data. This is facilitated by the large display behind me and access to virtual reality technologies, as well as dedicated support from Pawsey's visualisation specialists. This year, some of you might have heard about our tour from our young ambassadors, Agatha, Cyrus and Hugo. Thank you guys. We really appreciate you helping us spread the word about Pawsey and the great work we do. So let me tell you a little bit about Pawsey. The Pawsey Supercomputing Research Centre is named after Joseph Pawsey, a Melbourne scientist who was the father of radio astronomy. The reason Pawsey was built years ago was to support the astronomy community with the huge amounts of data that needed processing. Later on in the tour, you'll see some of this data visualised on the screen behind me. Pawsey is a Tier 1 high-performance computing facility in Australia. That means we accelerate science and research across the country, so the whole nation, people like you and me, can benefit from the hard work of scientists. We are partnered with 4 public universities in Western Australia, as well as the CSIRO, Australia's National Science Agency. Some of you might be wondering, what is a supercomputer? Well, I have a couple of children at home, so I imagine the school kids that have joined us today have some experience with gaming computers, doing one thing at a time as you use it. Well, a supercomputer is like this, but multiplied by thousands, to not just do one thing at a time, but thousands of things at a time. This is possible because all the cores in a supercomputer are connected and communicate with each other. This sounds complicated, doesn't it? But let me give you an example. Before Magnus, our flagship supercomputer, was made available to Australian researchers, we had a researcher sequencing the genes of a certain bacteria. They had to compare each gene with each other gene, and there were 3,000 of them. Each comparison took 3 seconds to compare. So this researcher would have to sit in front of their computer for 312 days to process all this data to solve one problem. After Magnus was made available to this researcher, the same problem could be solved in just an hour. And that's the power of supercomputing. But technology is just a tool. What makes Pawsey so special are its people. We have a wonderfully diverse group of people working here. 1 in 3 of us were born outside Australia. We haven't all got computer science degrees. We have physicists, arts graduates, communicators, and as I told you at the beginning, I'm an engineer, and there are many, many others. This year, our Science Week tour is a virtual tour, and that's because we can't have visitors at Pawsey at the moment, as we're in the middle of renovations to our centre, to create a brand new space for people to enjoy. The new space will be far more interactive than before, so we can host visitors for a whole range of events. We're also at the tail end of our $70 million upgrade to the supercomputers. So when we tour the white space in a little while, you might see a few things around the edge of the room. You might also notice some witches' hats indicating work areas. Our project will be finished towards the end of this year, and our white space will be going back to being a tidy space. Keep a lookout on our website and social media. We're nearly finished our renovations, and we're really looking forward to inviting you back to Pawsey in the future. Now, before we go into the white space, I'd like to tell you a bit about the invisible part of the Pawsey Supercomputing Centre. It's the part you wouldn't see if you came to visit us, but it's critical to our centre running smoothly. There's a whole hidden floor beneath the white space, and this is the area where power and cooling for the supercomputers is managed. At Pawsey, we're really mindful of minimising our impact on the environment. And as part of that effort to minimise our impact, we use a unique groundwater cooling system. The groundwater cooling system pumps water from the aquifer below us through a heat exchanger around the supercomputers to cool them. Then we put the water back in the aquifer. This saves over 4 million litres of water each year. If you do visit the Pawsey Centre, you'll see the side and the top of Pawsey is covered in solar panels. This offsets our footprint at Pawsey, making the groundwater cooling system zero emission. Our new supercomputers are also working towards a greener future. Even though our new supercomputer Photonics is 30 times more powerful than our existing supercomputers Magnus and Galaxy, it will be 10 times more energy efficient. So let's take a look in the white space and at some of our computers and data storage facilities. The first supercomputer we're looking at is the oldest supercomputer at Pawsey. This is Galaxy, and the artwork on Galaxy was painted by Jesse Pickett. It's called Rainbow Serpent and Moon and Sun, and it reflects the sky above, in reference to our link to radio astronomy. You might remember I originally told you that Pawsey was built to support radio astronomy, and we still support radio astronomy in Australia. Galaxy is our real-time supercomputer that's dedicated to radio astronomy. It's actually a really important part of a telescope that's located 800 kilometres away from our building. Without it, the telescope wouldn't be able to observe the beautiful stars and galaxies that surround us. The next supercomputer we're going to look at is Magnus. And we're going to start by looking at the back of Magnus. Magnus is our flagship supercomputer. It's a 1 petaflop supercomputer and it's 8 years old, which is quite old in the world of supercomputing. These cables are what make a supercomputer super. They connect all parts of the supercomputer to other parts so they can communicate with each other and work together at the same time. This is called working in parallel. It looks like a lot of cabling, and in fact, there's approximately 4 kilometres of optic fibre cable in there, and approximately 30% of the cost of a new supercomputer is spent on this critical interconnect. Next, we'll move around to the front of Magnus. The artwork on Magnus is called SKA Satellites on the Murchison and was painted by Margaret Whitehurst. It recognises our close connection to the northwest of Western Australia, and it was designed to reflect the ground below. And this is in reference to our support of one of our national research priorities, energy and resources. As I've said a few times, Magnus is currently Pawsey's flagship supercomputer, and in the last 8 years has done over 2 billion hours of research across a whole range of sciences. Some of the cool projects that Magnus has supported include climate change research, especially following the devastating Australian bushfires, COVID-19 research and vaccination development, and then looking deep in the ocean to find meadows of seagrass and coral reefs, and so much more. With Galaxy looking at the stars above and Magnus working on things a little closer to home, Pawsey can be thought of as being a giant virtual laboratory for all sorts of science, from atomic scale to astronomical scale. You actually might be some of the last people to see Magnus, as we're retiring it very soon. So on behalf of everyone, thank you, Magnus, and thank you all the people who've kept you running smoothly for your contribution to Australian science. You've seen our 2 current supercomputers, Magnus and Galaxy. They're soon going to retire, and we're replacing it with a new supercomputer. The machine you see here is Photonics. Photonics is the scientific name for WA's furry friend, the quokka. Margaret Whitehurst, who produced the artwork for Magnus, also produced the artwork for Photonics. And this artwork is called Meteorites, and it's inspired by the stars that shine over Wadjuri country in West Australia's Midwest. At the end of this year, when we get the full Photonics system up and running, Photonics will be 30 times the power of Magnus and will be the most powerful research supercomputer in the Southern Hemisphere. It will help meet the increasing demand of supercomputing power in Australian research. So what does this mean in a way that you can understand? Well, imagine 15,000 laptops all working together in parallel to solve some of the biggest mysteries we face. supercomputers generate a lot of heat. So they need to be cooled in an innovative way. As we move around to the back of Photonics, we can see some of the cooling system. Do you remember I mentioned the groundwater cooling earlier? Well, Photonics is cooled by a water cooling system where cold water flows through the cool blue pipes, passes over all the components that generate heat and cools them. The warm water then leaves the supercomputer via the red pipes. With the power of Photonics, we're working with clever minds across Australia to establish a quantum hub right here in our centre. Starting with Quantum Brilliance, which is a startup in Canberra. We've installed the world's first room temperature quantum computer in our white space. We also work with the University of Western Australia on quantum education, so that students like yourselves can work in the quantum field in the future and use these powerful systems to change the game in science. I've talked a lot about supercomputers, but where do we store all the information or data that they use to solve our greatest problems? As a part of the current upgrade to Pawsey, we're not just upgrading our supercomputers, but we've also launched Acacia and Banksia, our data systems. Acacia and Banksia store a huge amount of data. They can store 130 petabytes of data. What would that look like? Well, that's over 5 million Blu-rays, or over 1,000 years of viewing, or if you were to stack the Blu-rays one on top of each other, it would go 6 kilometres high. It's a lot of data. It's time for us to move on from the white space and bring you back upstairs to the visualisation lab. So I'm going to hand you over to Jessie really soon to talk about some of the science that Pawsey has contributed to. Hey, Jessie.
Hey. Thanks, Stacey. My name's Jessie. I manage this visualisation lab, and we're going to talk about some science that we're doing here at Pawsey. Next one.
There we go.
Pascal was first. Cool. So we're working with the Peter MacCallum Cancer Research Centre, and we're working on this visualisation. What we have here is a visualisation showing these chimeric antigen receptors, and what the researchers at Peter MacCallum are doing, they are binding these to the T cells in cancer patients' blood, and that can help the T cells to learn how to attack, kill and potentially cure leukemia, lymphoma, specifically B-cell type leukemia. So B-cell leukemia is one of the most common cancers that affect children, and we're helping to communicate that research to the general public as well as to potential patients so that they can see what is actually going to happen when they receive this treatment.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I always love watching the visualizations in here. And imagine if you were suffering from one of these terrible diseases, being able to see how the treatment is actually going to work inside your body would really be interesting, I think. The next bit of science that we'd like to show you is a little bit bigger. So that's on the micro scale. Now we're going to go to the very macro scale and have a look at some astronomy. Pascal.
Yes, hello everybody, Kaya. So I'm Pascal Lahi. I work here at the Pawsey Center as a supercomputing application specialist. So I try to help scientists do science with using these supercomputers. And here's a great example of what looks like maybe a meatball, but it's not a meatball in the sky. It is in fact the remnant of a supernova. So in about 1 million years ago, maybe about 12,000 light years from the Earth, something went bang. A big star exploded. And as it exploded, generated lots of light, and that explosion propagated outward. Now, fast forward 1 million years later, and we can see the remnants of this explosion in the sky. But this actually takes quite a bit of computing and really thoughtful processing. So the example which we're looking at here, I'll just talk about the physics for a bit, is the interaction of this blast wave, this bubble, interacting with the interstellar medium around it. So you're looking at magnetic fields, lots of complicated hot plasma kind of interacting with its surroundings, producing radio emission. And this looks quite cool. I mean, it's quite large. And even in this field of view, when the telescope was looking at it, it spotted other things that you might think or look like stars. So these little points all around, some up there, right? this is all galaxies for the most part. You're looking at not stars in this image, but principally galaxies, because that's what emits lots of radio emission. There's even one up here, which looks like an hourglass, and that is in fact a supermassive black hole heating up a bunch of stuff, shooting out a bunch of emission and generating large radio lobes that then the radio telescopes can pick up. Now, to do this, the radio telescopes capture a bunch of radio emission, but you can't just look at the radio sky like you would a telescope. Optical skies, right, like our eyes, we can just look up, collect light, and that's what telescopes are. They essentially, for the most part, are big light buckets that collect light and then put it on a camera or do a bunch of analysis on it. To do this, you actually have to combine the signals from a bunch of radio telescopes. That requires a lot of computing. And that's why radio telescopes are essentially antennas and computers. That's what a radio telescope is. It's not one and the other. They have to have a computer to do this type of stuff. And this was one of the first things we did on Cytonics to stress test the system. So our new computer, we took a while to try to get everybody up to speed, took a lot of effort on both parts, the radio astronomer team and the Pawsey team. And then we were able to generate this image. And as I said, there's a lot of information here. So the visualization room is also quite good because a lot of the stuff to look at and understand, you'd look at the color image here, try to understand the morphology that's going on. It's very useful to see radio lobes if you're kind of interested in galaxies and figure out, well, what's the size of those things? This is a big galaxy quite a distance away. So those radio lobes, those big bands of emission are huge. You know, they're bigger than the galaxy itself sometimes. And it's only by visualizing it that you kind of really start digging in and understanding what's going on.
That's fantastic, Pascal.
Have we had any questions come through?
Yeah. So while we're waiting for questions, I just kind of want to show, it's going to blink back and forth. One is the radio image in grayscale, and the other one's optical. So when you look, if you looked at this thing, you would never see it. It's not there. There's nothing there in optical light or even sort of infrared light. You have to look at radio. So the only way to understand the universe at large scales is to change your viewpoint and look at it through different wavelengths or different fields of view or different perspectives, as it were. Because even the galaxy is gone. So that galaxy is there. It's not, you can't see it really in optical. You can see the galaxy, but you can't see the radio lobes. All the cool stuff that's kind of there has no sort of relative image in visual light. And while we wait for questions, I just want to show how things have improved. So this was the same field of view ages ago, different telescope, less processing. As we up telescopes and we improve processing, we get to better and better images. If you go to the next one. Do we have another one? There we are. You can kind of make it out, right? And this is actually from the ASCAP telescope, but less processing, not as deep. So with processing with extra deep images, you can really clean up some of these artifacts that occur and also get a much sharper image. Slight improvement again. So you can see that to really get like the visuals that we were seeing before and understand the physics that's going on, you really need to tie a radio telescope to computing and really push a supercomputer to get the best images.
Absolutely. And our new supercomputer, Cytonics, is a major part of the ASCAP telescope and is the reason why we've got that final really detailed image. So we're very excited about that.
Yeah.
We've got any questions coming through?
Yeah. Cool. Okay, well, I'm going to welcome Aditi to in front of camera. Now, just before Aditi starts talking, Aditi prefers to be behind the camera. She's in charge of all the audio visual that you see here today. So this is quite a treat, Aditi in front of a camera.
Yes, not something that I usually do, but I'm really excited today because I know that we have a whole lot of schools who have joined us today. Lots of students out there. Hello, I know some of you, and some of you are new faces to us at Pawsey, but welcome. So glad you joined us today. We really encourage you to ask us some questions, any sort of question really, whether it's something that we talked about today or something that you're interested in. So we've got a few of our staff in the chat that are looking out for your questions. So please feel free to either unmute yourselves and ask away or pop something in the chat and we'll answer your questions as best as we can as well.
We have a first question from Ash, and it's about the Vis room. I think that's for Jesse. Jesse, can you tell us more about the screens? Ash wants to know if it's a 4K.
Yes, so this new visualization lab, this is a Sony crystal LED display. And so what that means essentially is it's not like your TVs you have at home where you might have an LCD or an OLED display. This is just an LED display in the literal sense, where every single pixel is an individual LED. In fact, 3 individual LEDs, a red one, a green one, and a blue one. And they're so small that you can't even see them with the visible eye, even if you come right up close to them. So it's a total of 4K resolution, but you could, if you could afford it, put all the pixels in here. They're small enough, you could put them into the size of a TV, but the TV would cost millions of dollars. So what we have here is that limit of technology where we can scale it up, perfect contrast, perfect really high brightness. We can view things in 3D with 3D glasses, and that's what this screen is capable of.
And the Viz room can be booked by researchers
Yes.
so that they can visualise their research on the big screen.
Yes. Another aspect of the Viz Lab is that it's a collaborative space. We have virtual reality headsets. We have staff that are always willing to work with researchers to sort of explore their data in ways that they hadn't considered before. So we bring, an outside perspective and computing capability to domains that may not have that knowledge.
We have some questions from Perth Montessori School. So they would like to know more about how long Pawsey has been operating and if there is any artist on our team.
If any art is on.
If we have any artists on our team.
Well, I'm sure that some of our team may have art as a hobby, but not formally on our team, no. Margaret Whitehurst, who was the artist for both Magnus and Cetonix, has visited the Pawsey Centre. And I actually think it was probably one of my favourite days at Pawsey. She's an absolutely lovely lady. She lives up close to Geraldton, a little bit out of Geraldton, and she had painted the artwork on a canvas, but she'd not seen it on the supercomputers. So I think she was quite excited to see her artwork on the supercomputers. And she actually signed Cetonix for us. And we don't know this for certain, but we're pretty confident it's the only supercomputer that's been signed by the artist. So we're a little bit proud of that as well.
I think also the visualization space, art doesn't necessarily have to be paint on a canvas. The kind of tech and the things that we can now do here with our data, like you can see the remnant, you saw the cells, they're beautiful in itself. We call the cells visualization that you saw before dancing flamingos, because they look like beautiful birds that are dancing around inside our body. And I think science in itself can be quite beautiful. And so what the astronomers are doing and the bioinformaticians and across all of the sciences here, we can visualize some really cool things and turn them into artwork. Yeah.
And Cyrus is saying hi, Aditi. So Cyrus is one of the artists, ambassadors who help us promote Science Week, and he is Aditi's nephew, and he's also in the virtual room. And also Jacaranda is saying hi.
Yep.
That's the
classroom.
special mention.
Hi, Cyrus. Hi, Jacaranda.
So about for how long Pawsey has been operating, I think we were called IVEC before, and IVEC I started 15 years ago supporting researchers in Western Australia till we were funded by by the Australian government to run a national facility. So I think since the Australian government funded us has been probably 10 years. That's why Magnus has been running for 8. And now we're gonna replace it for Cetonix.
I think something else that we could probably touch on is Stacey kind of talked about the diversity of people that we have here at Pawsey. And I think especially for all of you who are in schools, it's really important to remember that if you see a place like this, if you see a place like Pawsey or some of the really cool work that we're doing, don't think that you can't be that person. These places are built for you. We want you to come here. We want you to aspire to work here or to be a researcher here. Like Stacey mentioned before, we've talked a lot about science, technology, engineering, and maths, but a lot of us here are communicators or arts graduates or have lots of other passions beyond science and technology that we're pursuing and can pursue because of what we're allowed to do at a center like this. So if you see us and you think that we're cool or interesting, I think we're cool and interesting. Don't be afraid to come and talk to us and be a part of our community because it's a cool one. We're about to open up an awesome exhibition space so schools can actually come here instead of doing a virtual tour. And we encourage you to be here in any shape or form that you can and encourage you to pursue all of your interests and figure out then how we can all be together.
Do we have any other questions, Karina?
Not at the moment. I think I'm just sharing in the chat all the different careers that we have at Pawsey. So all the Pawsey staff in the room, please share which one is your background so people know where to go.
Jesse is my favorite because he's the traditional. Off you go, Jess.
So if you are wondering how you get this sort of job specifically with the visualization aspects, so I am a computer science graduate. I also studied games technology at Murdoch. So surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, a lot of what you do in real time rendering and graphics is pioneered and led in the gaming space where it's $1 billion industry. We've got companies dedicated towards building, these massive graphics cards that are, sold on to consumers. But then what we end up with in research is access to this same technology. We can adapt it to research. Whereas if it was just the research on its own, maybe the companies wouldn't invest so much into making them as powerful and as cheap as they are. So how I got into Pawsey is I did a Pawsey, or at the time IVET internship in 2010, more than 12 years ago, where I was introduced to, at this time, Magnus and Pawsey Centre was just an idea, but it was out there in the future. And so I was exposed to high performance computing, high-end visualization, working on stereoscopic 3D, working on all sorts of things like that. And then later on in my career, I find myself with that skill set. As soon as we have sort of expanding this visualization stuff, then I have that skill set and I can come back and I can apply it to the work that we do here.
That's fantastic. As I said at the beginning, I'm an engineer, but a totally useless engineer when it comes to supercomputing. I have a civil engineering degree. I then moved into project management. And after many years of project management in other industries, I was recruited to come and project manage the $70 million upgrade to the Pawsey Supercomputing Centre. So the first day I walked in here to do that, I wouldn't have been able to tell you what a supercomputer was. That was 3.5 years ago. So I've learned a lot in that time. I love working here. I love the science we do. I love the people we work with. So yes, I guess my pathway is just another pathway into Pawsey.
I think interestingly that Stacey didn't mention is that both of us used to work with trains before we came here. And so that was lots of fun.
I forgot. It took us a while to figure out we'd worked in the same industry before.
Probably crossed paths many times when we were out in maybe the Pilbara or jumping on some sort of heavy haul train. But yeah, like Stacey said, another unconventional path was I studied commerce at Curtin University and went on to work in a marketing team for trains and radio communications, and then learned about Pawsey through a really cool TED Talk. A colleague of Pascal's was talking, Dr. Natasha Hurley-Walker, and she introduced me to Magnus. I had no idea what a supercomputer was before I went to that talk. And I thought, yep, that's where I want to work. It took me a few months and waiting for jobs to open and things to do, but I knew this was the place I wanted to work. It was cool. It was fun science and technology. It was lots of my interests that all came together in a place that I could earn a living with as well. So it ticked just so many boxes. Applied for a job and never looked back.
How about you, Pascal?
Yes. So I'm originally from Canada. And I did my undergrad in physics. So if you will, it's still slightly more traditional path, but in my head, I was like, okay, I want to do physics. And I was kind of really enamored to like chalkboard, whiteboard, theoretical physics. started working, starting doing internships, but mostly actually at particle physics detectors and started building detectors. So small little particle physics detectors. Even worked at the Submarine Neutrino Observatory, which is actually down an active nickel mine. So you go down an active nickel mine, you walk a huge distance, and then there's this clean room, and then there's another clean room, and then there's this crazy detector. It was a really interesting experience. Finished it, had like a degree in physics and was kind of interested in doing more research. I thought I'll do a PhD, and I thought, oh, you know what? I really like cosmology. So the idea of studying the largest scales and the largest times and the universe as a whole, and thought I'd start a PhD, and hadn't really, like, I'd done some computing at this point. So I had done a bit of computing, but like one of the first conversations I had with my supervisor was, probably we're going to need a supercomputer. And I was like, oh, that sounds fun. All right, so how do you use a supercomputer? He's like, I don't know. I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to have to learn how to do this. So that was my path forward to doing computing, right? So I started doing physics, doing research, essentially building toy virtual universes, poking them around, changing the physics to understand what our universe is doing. And that requires supercomputers. It's very hard to model like large volumes of the universe on a small laptop. You really need to wait either 10,000 years or you use a supercomputer. I don't want to wait that long. So I did that, eventually moved to Australia for research. So I moved to Sydney first, did research, moved here also for research. So it was research positions. But then eventually a job came up. My research contract was ending, and I was looking around to see what I would be really kind of cool to do. Maybe stay in academia, so kind of go if you will, a teaching or lectureship route, or branch out. And a job, excuse me, came up to Pawsey. I thought, all right, I do computing anyway for research, and it'd be really nice and interesting to try to also help other scientists sort of maximize the impact of their science, to do cooler new science that they hadn't thought they could do before, because they hadn't realized how they could use this virtual laboratory, these laboratories that are supercomputers, to do that type of science. And that's why I'm here.
How are we going, Karina? Have we got any other questions coming through?
No, not anymore. I think a lot of comments of people loving our diversity and wondering how to get in here, but we have answered those questions already. So I'm just checking if there's any researcher using supercomputer in the room who would like to share their experience.
Well, while you're doing that, I can answer some of the questions that I get asked when people hear I work at the Supercomputing Centre. No, we don't mine crypto.
Yeah.
Although it would be quite a good tool for it, we don't do that. No, we don't play computer games on the supercomputer. Again, would be good fun, but we don't do that. I'm trying to think what else I get asked that are usually quick questions to answer. No, I don't think quantum computers will replace supercomputers. So our experiment with the quantum computer that we quickly touched on in the tour with quantum brilliance, I think in the future that quantum computers and supercomputers will work together. They solve different problems and different styles of problems. So they're both going to be very important tools going forward. And one of the things that's really exciting about us having the first room temperature quantum computer in our white space is as we expand photonics, because we still have more work to do on photonics, the intent is to integrate those two, the quantum computer and photonics, so that researchers can have some exposure to quantum computing, because it's a relatively new area. Whilst Quantum Brilliance are doing a great job designing the quantum computer, some of their techs have actually said to me the best way to get code written is to release it to researchers who have a problem to solve, and they start writing the code. So that'll be very exciting as that comes live in the next couple of years.
I was just going to quickly step in because I was a researcher, obviously, using supercomputers. And in fact, I actually tried one of, like within a year of moving to Perth, I actually tried one of the test beds that Pawsey had, which was called Athena. And I was one of the people that broke Athena by trying to run some of my simulations. I thought, oh, cool. We'll try a small one and then let's go big. Took down the supercomputer because I hit it too hard, figured out what the issues were. So in the context of programming, it's not as simple as taking a program and just having it naturally scale up on a supercomputer. You have to actually really think about it. So you could run, let's say, a browser or even a video game it's not going to run a lot faster on the supercomputer because it's not geared to that type of tech, right? You can't just have a program naturally just run faster if it uses more of a computer. You have to actually think about how to make it use more of the supercomputer, which is part of also my job. But that was part of things, learning curves as well, when I first started using supercomputers, is to figure out, okay, I got it fast on my laptop. Okay, ran it, didn't go any faster. What am I doing wrong? What am I thinking about? What is my perception of how I should use the supercomputer? Oh, obviously got a misunderstanding, and that took a while to learn. And that's why I'm here as well, to help other people learn.
And Pawsey run a lot of training. We probably haven't touched on that yet.
Yes.
So apologies to Anne, who may be watching. We run a lot of training for our researchers. So at various times in the year, various training sessions are run to help our researchers improve their capabilities so that they can improve their code. We also run programs where we partner with researchers to improve code as well. So one of the programs we're running at the moment is called PACER. And in PACER, we've got 10 projects running where we're partnering with researchers to ready their code for when Cetonix is expanded. And when we expand Cetonix, it will have GPU capability. And we've provided a lot of training to those researchers. And as their code is improved and runs more efficiently on Cetonix, that will help their domain. So not just the individual researcher, but all the researchers in that domain.
And I think we can also mention that we train also university students via the internship.
Yeah, so we run an internship program over summer. Once again, this is something Anne runs where students, so university students, are partnered with a project, and it's 12 quite intensive weeks. It starts with 1 or 2 weeks of supercomputing as a crash course, and then they have access to our supercomputer, and they work with the projects over that 12 weeks. And we found that to be it's a wonderful program. At the closing meeting for last summer's interns, where the interns are presenting on their project, we were quite excited to see some industry people in there, I guess, recruiting and seeing what skills were out there. And that really says something for the program, actually, that we get that sort of interest from industry. The call is out at the moment, actually, for interns. So if you're interested for a university student, please check our website. All the information on how to apply will be on there. It's also regularly posted on social media, but the website's probably the cleanest place to find it.
And I will say that I would have loved to have that opportunity when I was kind of doing my studies, because it was a deep dive for me, like really trying to get up to speed and also do research and do courses. But this would have been a pretty cool way of spending, 12 weeks kind of doing really interesting science, kind of seeing the landscape of what's happening, because you're kind of usually at the forefront. The internships are usually like, there's an unsolved problem. You want to start trying to see if you can solve it. That's kind of the scope at which they're doing it, and they get to try it on sort of world-leading tech. That's what's very exciting.
That's right.
And I think I'm gonna paraphrase a question from Fatima. How are our supercomputers used? Who use it? How we allocate that space? And
okay. So as I touched on very briefly at the beginning, we're federally funded and state government funded, and we're in partnership with the West Australian universities and CSIRO. We run a couple of different calls for projects. They're merit-based calls. One of them we run in partnership with NCI, which is a supercomputing centre based in Canberra. And the calls for that are opening, I'm going to say nowish. I apologise for not knowing the date. And that's the MC Mass call. So researchers need to apply through that, explaining their project and basically justifying the merit, and they'll be granted a certain amount of time on the supercomputer. And they can use that time for their research, basically. We do also do a partner call, and that's with our partners, as I said, CSIRO and the universities. So there's also a call through that stream as well for projects, also merit-based.
Do they have to pay?
They do not have to pay. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about Pawsey. And I'm going to paraphrase because we don't have any slides for this, but one particular piece of science that really touched me and wouldn't have been possible without the fact that Pawsey, it doesn't require you to pay, is science done by some medical researchers relatively recently. And they've developed an AI so that they can predict in traumatic brain injuries approximately half an hour before brain swelling occurs, which can be catastrophic. And that half-hour window of extra time makes a real difference to the outcome for the patient. Now, this algorithm that they wrote didn't work the first time or the second time. I won't take you all the way through. It was about 30 times before the algorithm worked. Now, if you're paying for time on a paying system, you'd never have gone that far. You would have dropped the idea after 5 or 6 times. No one has that sort of fun. Well, few people have that sort of funds. I certainly don't. So that particular piece of science probably wouldn't have been found if they hadn't been working on supercomputers at Pawsey.
Yeah, as a researcher, right, it's very useful, right? Because the nominalistic research that I was doing was quite blue sky in the sense that I was trying to explore the multiverse with simulations. It's hard to get a lot of funding and then say, okay, I've got funding. I want to pay concrete cash to get computing time. But schemes like this, where fields from a variety of science domains can go, we have an idea. Here's our idea. Look, it's very cool. I think we can make us use of the supercomputer and then try to use the supercomputer without having to say, yeah, it's going to succeed and this is the exact outcome. You can say, I don't know what the exact outcome is. We are trying, and you still can get access to like high tech and give a try an idea. And that I think is extraordinarily useful because it doesn't limit you at saying, well, we can't try ideas that we don't know will succeed because it's going to cost us $10,000. You're like, it just costs time and effort, but you're happy to put the time and effort to try out a new idea. And so there's a bunch of science domains that probably would have never gone the supercomputing route because it's expensive. They don't have the money. They're like, well, we might have a little bit of money, but saving that and setting it aside, tricky. But if we can just say, we have a great idea that we want to try, suddenly this opens an opportunity to tons of science fields that would have said, well, we don't normally do this, so why try? Now people can say, well, we don't normally do it, but let's try.
Yeah. I think the other thing that we talked a lot about supercomputers, but the data storage is also critical. And I might hand over to Pascal on this once I drop the idea in his lab. There's been a recent scientific discovery that's been associated with the storage at Pawsey in, I believe it was MWA, went back through some old files.
Yes.
And now over to Pascal.
Right. So to give context, we do have a Christmas tree sort of telescope here. So this is a radio telescope, or at least a part of one.
A very small part.
A very small part. You basically take something like this, you collect them all together, you collect many tiles together, and you get the Murchison Wide Field Array, which is a radio telescope. That radio telescope just basically looks up at the sky and it collects a ton of data because it's just looking up at the sky, collecting data. And that means that they have petabytes, right? Thousands of terabytes, thousands of equivalents of laptops of data to sift through, to find interesting unknown unknowns. That means you need to have a system that can, one, store all that data, but then access it and like access it fast to process, to try something. Again, about exploration. And so we have Acacia, we have also tape systems that have the ability to store this much data, like petabytes and petabytes, but also then retrieve the data, put it available for processing on a supercomputer, process it, and then see if there's something interesting. And that was what happened essentially in a recent discovery against a supernova, or repeating supernova, that they had to go back to archival data. So this data was sitting in tapes in a machine, obviously on our storage systems, pull out that data, start looking at where they could find this stuff, processing it in, and then saying, yeah, we have found something interesting. It's not as simple as DVDs, popping it in, because there's way too much data. So that's the thing. It's kind of higher scale that requires, petabytes of data. They're like the tape drives actually have little robotic arms that pull out tapes for then accessing. So they get put back in, they sit there doing nothing, kind of retaining data, but then to access them, you need infrastructure and you need skills as well. And we're there to help. The researchers also have skills as well. And it essentially provides an avenue for looking for things that you didn't know you were looking for in older data.
And if I remember correctly, what they found they hadn't found anything like it before, not just in Australia.
That's
it
correct.
hadn't been found
At all.
worldwide anything like this before, and this data had been sitting in our archive.
Yeah.
And it just needs to be it's easy for me to say, retrieved, reviewed, and this was identified. And I think that's also really powerful science that we support. How are we going, Karina?
Really well. I'm sharing the stories of all the researchers working using Pawsey and their journeys. I don't know if we can we show Natasha Harley Walker glimoscope in that screen, and is that possible, Jess?
Yeah, we'll get that up in just a minute.
See some.
Perhaps while we're bringing it up, Pascal, can you give some background into how it's found, and before it comes up, a little bit of information about it?
Sure. So I think the initial discovery or possible discovery was done by a student, actually. So a student was looking at data, noticed something anomalous in the sense that they found a signal in the sky that looked a bit weird. And they said, well, it's just in one observation. We probably need more observations. But that first bit of discovery was, if you will, on slightly newer data. And I can't say I know exactly where in the galaxy it is, but
you can pretend.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of interesting things in this galaxy. So if we go to the radio, so this is visible. So if you looked at the sky.
So yeah, so the first shot we saw, which is not this one,
We'll go back
was
to
what you would see if you lay on the ground on a clear night in the Murchison of Western Australia.
Yeah.
Which is sort of literally in the middle of nowhere in Western Australia. That would be what you'd see, which is pretty amazing all on its own, to be honest.
Right. So we've got the Milky Way here. I don't know if you can see down here, but there's a couple of satellite galaxies. There's a few other things. There's some nebulas that are producing stars and so on. But it looks like stars, there's a dust band across the galaxy. It kind of seems to make sort of physics, because this is what we see. If you then go to the Gleam radio, as in before, you get a very different view of the universe.
Yeah, so this is what you get from a radio telescope. So it's quite different. And one of my favourite facts on this is I'm sure that you're looking at this from wherever you're watching and you're thinking that all these dots are stars, but they're not stars.
Well, they're galaxies.
They're galaxies. So that's the sort of detail that's here, and it's looking so much further, I guess, back in time, Pascal.
Yes, that's correct. The further you look away from us, the further back in time you look. So some of these dots essentially are being emitted from a galaxy that's maybe 20, if you will, million light years away, or 100 million light years away, or even further away. And that means you're looking at the galaxy as it was 100 million years ago, or 200 million years ago, or 1 billion years ago. But also in the galaxy, you can see bubbles. I don't know if you guys can make it out. Those bubbles, like the supernova bubble that we saw, essentially are remnants. But there's also radio emission from pulsars in here. So these are super dense stars that typically behave in a fashion we sort of expect. So they look, we kind of understand it. The pulsar that was discovered by Natasha and her colleagues is weird, right? So it is literally boils down to it's a bit weird because if you look at where they would sit, sort of what their properties are, it's quite an outlier. So it could be magnetars. It could be, I can't remember how many nominal explanations occurred after they've posted their discovery of what this could be. Most proposals are it's a magnetar of some sort, so that's a neutron star with incredibly intense magnetic fields, and that's why it's behaving the way it is. It's neutron stars, I should say, are the dead remnants of supernovas. So you blow off something, you can get a neutron star at the end. So it's the remnant of a star, and it typically is very compact, so mass of the sun, size of the Earth, quite strong magnetic fields, and magnetar kind of maybe the same thing, except very, very strong magnetic fields. So incredibly to the point where you can maybe distort atoms and so on. So very, very strong magnetic fields. We thought we kind of knew what they looked like, and then this came up and showed up. It's a bit weird, and so they can look a bit different.
So, and I think too, so obviously this was done by Natasha using the MWA telescope.
Yep.
Once again, you can't get this image without a supercomputer. So there's that link. As Pascal said earlier, they really are combined as one piece of technology. You need the supercomputer and the telescope to be able to look out and see all of this detail, and then to discover things that I still think it's really exciting that they've discovered something. Quite frankly, they don't know what it is.
Yep.
So there's a whole pile more study to be done there. Who knows what they'll find, to be completely honest.
I mean, I'll point out that there's the ASCAP has also found like bubbles and they're like, I don't know what this bubble is. I can't remember what the acronym they came up with, but there's not only exploration in the radio sky where they find things. They're like, well, a cloud, emission, something. Does anybody know exactly what this is? And most people raise their hand and say, oh, I don't know, from the experts, right? So there's a lot of cool stuff that's out there, but that's true in all fields of science and all sort of research. There's lots of interesting things to do.
I wonder if some of the students have heard about the research where they're mapping genomes of our native animals. So this is our quokka. I talked about the fact Suetonius is named after the scientific name for a quokka. So if anyone doesn't know, this is what a quokka looks like. They don't usually wear a tie. That's a special extra feature. But we have another researcher who's been working to map the genomes of our native animals. And this is important because if that animal were to become endangered or worst case extinct, from that information, it's feasible that in the future they could be brought back or certainly maintained once they get to that endangered point. And the genome of the quokka has been mapped, as well as many others. We're obviously very passionate about the quokka, so we know that one's been done. And she does that work out from Perth as well. So she's a local researcher.
And Catherine had a question, and I'm not sure it's about the real world application of supercomputers or the real world application of projects like Natasha Hurley Walker, like the repeating transient. I don't know if we want to go all the way to Wi-Fi.
Well, I was about to say that there's a few ways to answer that, but part of, for Pawsey, the challenge with astronomy processing and data is the sheer amount of it. The amount of data that comes down the pipeline from the Murchison to us is astronomical.
Yes.
Apologies to everybody. And so we're learning a lot about how to manage that sort of data, how to move that sort of data, how to manage it, how to retrieve it, how to process it. Now, if you would look into the future and think about maybe more automated cities, or even if you don't want to go that far, being able to automate the power grid so that you can manage the power grid for a city so that they don't have outages because too many people are turning on their air conditioners when they get home from school. That same sort of technology, that managing the data could be applied to that sort of a problem. The other one that we often use as an example is, I imagine you all enjoy your Wi-Fi. We've actually had some challenges with our Wi-Fi here in the last couple of days, but usually it's quite good. Wi-Fi is an offshoot that was discovered through radio astronomy. So the Wi-Fi you've all got in your homes, you might have it, but it wouldn't have been found the way it was if it wasn't for the work in radio astronomy.
Yeah, I was going to say as well that I think the practical application for all sort of research is because it's interesting. Curiosity is a big driver for kids and everybody. So if you're curious about something and you answer something, that in itself is already a practical application. You satisfied a deep-seated curiosity about something. It doesn't have to be necessarily a hard-coded, I have a hammer. If you're just like, I understand how hammers work, like in detail, how things work, it's always, because you don't know how it could be applied. So some of the physics we see in the sky, we don't know that we can apply how to make a supernova, but the nominal physics that's in there is fusion and other stuff, which might be might be stuck in fusion plants. So it's very hard to say concretely how some research being done might have a direct application because we still haven't got to that stage. The examples would be, as I said, Wi-Fi, where people were mucking around with radios. And there's like, no one said, oh, I want to do communication at this point. It just came out of essentially doing research about radios. Someone sticking up a radio dish looking at the sun eventually led to Wi-Fi.
I think too, and I guess in a more topical way too, supercomputers around the world, and Pawsey was included in this, was involved in research for COVID-19.
Yeah.
And we were all impacted by COVID-19 and the shutdowns. I personally had COVID a month ago, so can speak from personal experience. It's not a lot of fun. But the vaccine development, understanding the actual virus, and also understanding how it was moving through cities and through populated areas and being able to model all of that was all done on supercomputers around the world. And I certainly know here in Perth, we actually had a really easy ride with it. I think we can all agree looking at the rest of the world. But that sort of science, you must have heard, I assume, that these vaccines don't usually come out this quickly. but the addition of supercomputers and the attention from so many centres around the world really helped accelerate that, so that we can get vaccinated and the impact can be much smaller on us.
I
It's
think we are.
actually, oh, so go ahead, Karina.
I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say that we are approaching the end of the tour today, and I'm gonna put the people in that room in a spot, and I wondering if we can have a selfie taken. So all of you
Okay.
is still here. I will invite you to turn your cameras on. I know that we have people joining from Germany that are still probably in their PJs, but it will be nice if we all get together.
Who's going to
For a
take the photo?
selfie. I'm gonna be taking the photo. Thank you, Jess. I almost forget. So
Here comes Jess.
I don't want to
All
block
right.
anybody's
It's
view.
really
though.
tricky. Oh, hello, Matt.
Let's go down, yeah.
so are we ready? Yep. So I think we have some schools who weren't able to do that.
Oh, my friend.
Do you want your
Yep. Let me just take another one. I need to quickly save this one, otherwise it won't save it. Save and then go for a new one. Here we are. Thank you very much. Thank you for let me play this.
Well, I guess in closing, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope we have imparted some of our passion for science, for supercomputing, for quantum computing, for data, and all the other things we've talked about. Really be lovely if in the future you can come and visit our centre when we've finished the renovations. If you've got any questions, if you want to know any more, please go to our website. There's a lot of information there, and there's certainly ways to contact us if you want more information through there. So thank you for joining us. Enjoy the rest of National Science Week, and goodbye. Goodbye.
See ya.
Bye.